She handed me a mop in front of 200 wedding guests and told me to clean up my own mess. I smiled, said nothing, and quietly left the reception. But what I did 3 days later made her lose everything she thought she'd gained. I'm grateful you're here to listen. Please comment which country you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. At 70 years old, I thought I'd experienced every flavor of heartbreak life could serve. I buried my husband at 45, raised 3 children on a textile factory worker's salary, and watched my body age while my spirit tried to stay young. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the moment my own daughter looked at me with contempt in her eyes on what should have been the happiest day of her life. My name is Miriam Castellanos, and I live in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Riverside, a working-class neighborhood about 40 minutes outside of Thornbury Heights, where the wealthy families have their estates. For the past 6 months, my entire world had revolved around one thing: my daughter Valencia's wedding to Preston Ashworth. Preston came from what Valencia breathlessly called established wealth, the kind of family that owned the largest pharmaceutical company in the state, summered in the Hamptons, and had buildings at the university named after their ancestors. The Ashworths were Thornbury Heights royalty, and my Valencia was marrying into their dynasty. I remember the day Valencia came to tell me about the engagement. She'd arrived at my apartment in her new Mercedes, a gift from Preston, she told me proudly, wearing a designer outfit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The diamond on her finger was so large it seemed almost vulgar, catching the light and throwing rainbows across my worn living room carpet. "Mama," she'd said, and I noticed she'd stopped calling me Mom sometime in the past year. Preston proposed. "We're getting married at the Ashworth estate next September." I'd hugged her tight, tears streaming down my face. "Oh mi amor, I'm so happy for you. Tell me everything. How did he propose? Were you surprised?" She'd pulled away from my embrace sooner than I expected. "It was at the country club, during the spring gala. Very elegant, very proper. Everyone important was there to witness it." Something in her tone made me pause. "That sounds lovely, sweetheart." It was perfect. She'd walked to my window, looking out at the parking lot with its mix of old cars and overgrown landscaping. "Mama, I need to talk to you about the wedding." "Of course. I want to help however I can. I've been saving money, and I thought maybe I could contribute to the flowers, or..." "That's not necessary." She'd turned back to me, and for the first time, I saw something uncomfortable in her expression. "The Ashworths are handling all the expenses. Preston's mother, Genevieve, is very particular about how things should be done. She has connections with the best wedding planners, the finest caterers, everything top tier." "Oh." I'd tried not to feel hurt. "Well, that's generous of them. But surely there's something a mother can do to help with her daughter's wedding?" Valencia had sat down on my threadbare couch, careful not to let her expensive handbag touch the fabric. "Mama, I need you to understand something. This wedding, it's not just about Preston and me. It's about families coming together. The Ashworths have certain expectations, certain standards." A cold feeling had started in my stomach. "What are you trying to say?" "I'm saying that I need you to be careful. Watch what you say around Preston's family. Don't talk about working at the factory, or about growing up in Riverside, or about..." She trailed off, but her meaning was clear. "Or about being poor." I'd finished for her, my voice quiet. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Valencia had stood up, smoothing her skirt with hands that used to help me fold laundry in this very apartment. "I just want everything to be perfect. Can you understand that? This is my chance at a different life, Mama. A better life." I'd wanted to ask her what was wrong with the life I'd given her, the life I'd worked myself to exhaustion to provide. But I'd stayed silent, because I loved her, and because I wanted her to be happy. "I understand," I'd said instead. "I'll do whatever you need." Over the following months, I'd learned exactly what that meant. The exclusion begins. The wedding planning happened almost entirely without me. Valencia would occasionally call to update me on decisions that had already been made. "The color scheme, champagne and ivory, very sophisticated," she'd said, the venue, the Ashworth Estate Gardens, the guest list, 300 people, most of whom I'd never met. When I'd asked if I could come along to help choose her wedding dress, there'd been a long pause on the phone. Genevieve already scheduled appointments at the bridal boutiques in the city. She has relationships with the owners, so we'll get special treatment. It's really just going to be me, Genevieve, and Preston's sister Arabella. Oh. I'd tried to keep the hurt out of my voice. I understand. It's not personal, Mama. It's just. Genevieve has very specific taste, and she knows what will photograph well, what will impress the right people. You understand. But I hadn't understood. What mother doesn't get to help her daughter choose her wedding dress? I'd found out later, through a casual comment Valencia made, that they'd also gone to 3 different boutiques over 2 weekends, having champagne and hors d'oeuvres while trying on gowns. Valencia posted the photos on social media, her laughing with Genevieve and Arabella, surrounded by white tulle and silk, looking like she'd found the family she'd always wanted. I wasn't in a single photo. The same pattern repeated itself with every aspect of the wedding. The cake tasting, the floral arrangements, the menu selection, all done with the Ashworths, all without me. When I'd gently suggested that perhaps I could host a small bridal shower for Valencia and her friends, she'd grimaced. Genevieve already planned the bridal shower at the country club. It's going to be very exclusive, only immediate family and Valencia's closest friends from her new social circle. I'm immediate family, I'd said, trying not to sound as hurt as I felt. Another long pause. Of course you are. I just meant, look, these events have certain expectations. The country club has dress codes, and the conversation tends to be about things like summer homes and charity galas, and I just thought you might feel more comfortable if I wasn't there to embarrass you. That's not fair, Mama. Isn't it? We'd argued then, for the first time in years. Valencia had accused me of being oversensitive, of not understanding how important it was for her to make a good impression on her new family. I'd accused her of being ashamed of where she came from, of forgetting that I'd sacrificed everything to give her opportunities. The argument had ended with Valencia in tears, saying she had enough stress with the wedding without me making things harder. I'd apologized, even though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for, and we'd hung up with a tension between us that had never existed before. Despite being excluded from most of the wedding planning, I was still expected to find an appropriate dress for myself. Valencia had sent me a text message with guidelines. Mama, please nothing too bright or attention-grabbing. Genevieve suggests mother of the bride dresses should be elegant but understated. Think neutral tones, beige, taupe, soft gray. Nothing that will stand out too much in photos. Also, please make sure it's appropriate length, below the knee, and modest neckline. The Ashworths are quite traditional about these things. I'd gone to the department store in downtown Riverside with my friend Lucia, who'd been my neighbor for 20 years. I'd saved $400 from my factory paychecks over several months, money that should have gone toward fixing my car's transmission, but Valencia's wedding felt more important. The mother of the bride section was smaller than I expected, with dresses that all seemed to look the same, shapeless, matronly things in shades of beige and gray that made them look designed to help women disappear. This one's nice, Lucia had said, pulling out a soft gray dress with lace sleeves. I'd held it up against myself in the mirror. It was fine. Appropriate. Exactly what Valencia had requested. But looking at my reflection, I'd felt a wave of sadness. When had I become someone who needed to fade into the background at her own daughter's wedding? What about this one? Lucia held up a dress in a beautiful shade of deep burgundy, with elegant beading across the bodice. This color would look stunning with your skin tone. Valencia said neutral tones only. Since when do you let anyone tell you what to wear, Miriam? I'd taken the burgundy dress into the fitting room anyway, just to see. When I'd put it on and looked at myself in the mirror, I'd felt beautiful for the first time in months. The color brought warmth to my face, and the cut was flattering without being inappropriate. But then I'd imagined Valencia's face if I showed up in something that stood out. I'd imagined Genevieve's cold disapproval, the whispered comments from Preston's family about the mother of the bride who didn't know her place. I'd bought the gray dress. When I'd sent Valencia a photo of myself wearing it, she'd replied, "Perfect. Very appropriate. Genevieve will be pleased." Not, "You look beautiful, Mama," or "I can't wait to see you on my wedding day." Just approval that I'd followed the rules, that I'd made myself small enough not to cause problems. The week before, increasing tension. The week leading up to the wedding, Valencia had been staying at the Ashworth estate to help with final preparations. I'd called her several times, wanting to hear her voice, wanting to feel connected to this momentous occasion in her life. She'd answered my calls with increasing impatience. "Mama, I really can't talk right now. Genevieve and I are meeting with the wedding coordinator." "Mama, this isn't a good time. We're doing the final seating chart and it's very complicated." "Mama, please, I have a million things to do. Can this wait?" On Thursday, 3 days before the wedding, I'd called to ask what time I should arrive on the wedding day and whether she needed any help getting ready. "The wedding starts at 4, she'd said, her voice distracted. "You should probably arrive by 3:30 to find your seat." "And what about before? When you're getting ready?" "I thought I could help you with your dress, or your hair, or..." "The hair and makeup team will be here starting at noon. And Genevieve and Arabella are going to help me get into my dress. It's a very delicate gown with lots of buttons, and they've practiced the technique with the seamstress." "I see." My throat felt tight. "So you don't want me there while you're getting ready?" A sigh from the other end. "Mama, please don't make this difficult. It's not about what I want, it's about what makes sense. The professionals need space to work, and there will already be a lot of people in the suite. Having more people will just create chaos. I'm not people, Valencia. I'm your mother. I know that. And you'll be there for the ceremony, and the reception, and all the important parts. But the getting ready time is really just logistics and stress. Trust me, you don't want to be there for that part anyway." But I did want to be there. I wanted to button my daughter into her wedding dress, the way my mother had buttoned me into mine all those years ago. I wanted to tell her how proud I was, how beautiful she looked, how much I loved her. Instead, I would arrive just in time to be directed to my seat, like any other guest. "All right," I'd said quietly. "I'll see you at 3:30. Thank you for understanding. I love you, Mama." But the words sounded rushed, automatic, like something she was saying because she knew she should, not because she felt it. Wedding day morning, preparation and anxiety. The morning of the wedding, I woke up at dawn even though I didn't need to be at the Ashworth estate until mid-afternoon. I couldn't sleep, my mind running through 100 different scenarios, all of them tinged with anxiety. I spent 2 hours getting ready, longer than I'd spent getting ready for anything in years. I showered, carefully styled my hair the way the salon had shown me during my practice run, applied makeup with a shaking hand, and finally stepped into the gray dress. Looking at myself in the mirror, I saw a 70-year-old woman trying desperately to look acceptable to people who would never really accept her. My hands were rough from decades of factory work, my face lined with the stress of raising 3 children alone, my body showing the wear of a life lived without the luxury of personal trainers and spa treatments. But I'd done the best I could. The dress was appropriate, my hair was neat, my makeup was careful. I'd followed every rule Valencia and Genevieve had set. Surely that would be enough. Lucia came over at 2 o'clock to drive me to Thornbury Heights. My car had finally died the week before, the transmission I'd been putting off, and I hadn't had the money to fix it after buying the dress and shoes. "You look lovely," Lucia said warmly when I opened the door. "Valencia should be so proud." I managed a weak smile. "I just hope I don't embarrass her." "Embarrass her? Miriam, you're her mother. You raised her by yourself, worked your fingers to the bone to give her opportunities. She should be honored that you're there." But as we drove through Riverside and into the increasingly upscale neighborhoods of Thornbury Heights, I felt my anxiety growing. The houses got larger, the lawns more manicured, the cars and the driveways more expensive. This wasn't my world. It had never been my world. And my daughter desperately wanted to forget that it had once been hers. The Ashworth estate was like something out of a movie. We turned off the main road onto a private drive marked by stone pillars, each topped with brass lions. The driveway wound through ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss, past perfectly manicured gardens bursting with late summer flowers. The house itself, calling it a house felt inadequate, was a sprawling Georgian colonial with white columns, black shutters, and enough windows to suggest at least 20 rooms. Behind it, I could see the gardens where the ceremony would take place, transformed into something magical with white chairs, floral arches, and what looked like 1,000 tiny lights waiting to sparkle as evening fell. Cars lined the circular driveway, Mercedes, BMWs, even a Bentley or two. Lucia's 10-year-old Toyota looked painfully out of place. "Do you want me to stay?" Lucia asked, seeing my face. "No, you should go. I'll be fine." I tried to sound more confident than I felt. Valencia arranged for a car service to take me home after the reception. Lucia squeezed my hand. "Call me if you need anything." "I mean it." I got out of the car and watched my oldest friend drive away, feeling like I was losing my last connection to the world where I belonged. A young woman in a black suit approached me with a clipboard. "Name, please?" "Miriam Castellanos." "I'm the mother of the bride." She scanned her list, and I saw her eyebrows rise slightly. "Oh. Mrs. Castellanos. You're seated in Section B, Row 3, Seat 7. Section B, Row 3. Not in the front row with the other immediate family members, but somewhere in the middle of the general guests." "Is that where the mother of the bride typically sits?" I asked carefully. The young woman looked uncomfortable. "That's where Mrs. Ashworth indicated you should be seated. She mentioned something about the photography angles and family portrait balance. If you have any concerns, I can check with." "No, it's fine." I forced a smile. "Thank you." She directed me toward the gardens, and I walked slowly, very aware of the other guests arriving. The women wore designer dresses and carried expensive handbags. The men looked comfortable in their tailored suits. Everyone seemed to know each other, air-kissing and exchanging greetings about summers in Europe and children at prestigious universities. I found my seat in row 3 and sat down, folding my hands in my lap and trying to look like I belonged. The PRE ceremony encounters. As more guests arrived and found their seats, I noticed that the first 2 rows were filling with people I recognized from Valencia's social media posts, the Ashworth family and their inner circle. Preston's parents, Genevieve and Bradford Ashworth, sat in the front row on the groom's side, greeting guests with the practiced ease of people accustomed to hosting events. Genevieve was everything I was not, tall, elegantly thin, with the kind of blonde hair that required professional maintenance. She wore a cream-colored gown that probably cost more than 6 months of my salary, and pearls that looked like they'd been passed down through generations of Ashworth women. When her eyes swept over the guests and landed on me in row 3, her expression didn't change. But something flickered in her eyes, a moment of calculation, maybe satisfaction that the mother of the bride knew her place. "Excuse me, are these seats taken?" I looked up to find an older couple gesturing to the empty seats beside me. They looked to be in their 70s, well-dressed but not ostentatiously so. "No, please," I said, grateful for the potential company. The woman sat down beside me with a warm smile. "I'm Dorothy, and this is my husband, Martin. We're friends of the Ashworths." "And you?" "Miriam. I'm Valencia's mother." Dorothy's eyes widened with genuine surprise. "Valencia's mother?" But I thought, oh. She seemed to catch herself, a flush rising in her cheeks. "I'm sorry, I just assumed the mother of the bride would be seated in the front row." The observation, though made kindly, stung. There were concerns about photography angles. I repeated the excuse I'd been given. Dorothy and Martin exchanged a look that suggested they didn't believe that explanation any more than I did, but they were too polite to say so. "Well, we're delighted to meet you," Dorothy said firmly. "Valencia must be so excited. I remember when my daughter got married, I was an absolute wreck all day." For the next 15 minutes, Dorothy chatted with me about her own daughter's wedding, her grandchildren, and life in general. It was the first normal, kind conversation I'd had in months that didn't feel weighted with judgment or expectation. I found myself relaxing slightly, grateful for her warmth. Then the music changed, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. The guests stood as the wedding party began to process down the aisle, Preston's groomsmen and Valencia's bridesmaids, all young and beautiful, moving in perfect synchronization. And then Valencia appeared on the arm of her older brother, Miguel, who was giving her away since her father had died so many years ago. My breath caught in my throat. She was breathtakingly beautiful. Her wedding gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk and lace, with a cathedral train that flowed behind her like water. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant style, and even from row 3, I could see that her makeup was flawless. She looked like a princess, like a dream, like everything she'd ever wanted to be. And as she walked past my row, her eyes scanning the crowd, I waited for her to look at me, to give me a smile or a nod of acknowledgement. But her gaze slid past me like I wasn't there, focusing instead on Preston waiting for her at the altar, and on Genevieve in the front row, who was dabbing at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief. I stood there, frozen, as my daughter walked down the aisle at her wedding without once looking at her own mother. Dorothy's hand found mine and squeezed gently. She didn't say anything, but the gesture of kindness nearly broke me. The ceremony was beautiful, traditional, elegant, everything Valencia had wanted. They exchanged vows that had been carefully written to emphasize their commitment to building a life together, to honoring their families, to creating a legacy. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," and Preston lifted Valencia's veil to kiss her, the guests applauded. I applauded too, my hands moving automatically while my heart felt strangely empty. Then it was over, and the wedding party was processing back down the aisle. Valencia and Preston looked radiantly happy, waving to guests on both sides. When they passed my row, Valencia's eyes met mine for just a brief second. I smiled at her, tears streaming down my face, hoping she could see how proud I was, how much I loved her despite everything. But her expression didn't change. She looked away and continued down the aisle, and I was left standing there with my tears and my gray dress and my section B, row 3, seat 7. The worst was yet to come. The cocktail hour revelation. After the ceremony, guests were directed to a terrace area for cocktail hour while the gardens were transformed for the reception. Waiters circulated with champagne and elaborate hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Everything was perfect, elegant, expensive. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, more to have something to hold than because I wanted to drink. I stood near the edge of the terrace, watching the other guests mingle and laugh, feeling very much like an outsider at my own daughter's wedding. Miriam. I turned to see Miguel approaching, handsome in his groomsman tux. My son pulled me into a tight hug, and for the first time all day, I felt like I was actually wanted. "Mijo," I said, holding him close. "You looked so handsome walking your sister down the aisle." "I wish Dad could have been here to see her," Miguel said quietly. "But I think we did him proud." We stood together for a moment, united in our memory of the man we'd both lost. Then Miguel's wife, Carmen, joined us, and we made small talk about the ceremony, carefully avoiding the topic of why I'd been seated so far back. That's when I overheard the conversation that would set the tone for the rest of the evening. A group of women stood nearby, their voices carrying across the terrace. I recognized one of them as Arabella, Preston's sister. She was holding court with several other young women, all dressed in expensive cocktail dresses and dripping with jewelry. "The ceremony was absolutely perfect," one of them was saying. "Genevieve must be so relieved." "You have no idea," Arabella replied, taking a sip of her champagne. "Mother was terrified this wedding would be problematic." "Problematic how?" Arabella lowered her voice, but not enough. "Well, Valencia's background, obviously. Mother did extensive research when Preston first started dating her. Did you know her mother worked in a factory? Her whole life, apparently. Never even finished high school." My face flushed hot. Miguel's hand found my elbow, steadying me. "Oh my God," another woman gasped. "And Preston's family is..." "Exactly." Mother was beside herself. But Valencia is smart, she's been working very hard to distance herself from all that. Changed her entire image, her social circle, everything. She barely even talks about her mother anymore. That's so sad, the first woman said, though her tone suggested more intrigue than sympathy. Where is her mother, anyway? Oh, she's here somewhere. Mother made sure she was seated, appropriately. Far enough back that she won't be prominent in any of the professional photos. Valencia was very specific about that. She didn't want her mother's aesthetic to be too visible in the wedding documentation. The women laughed, and the conversation drifted to other topics. I stood there, trembling with humiliation and rage. Miguel's grip on my arm tightened. Mama, he said urgently. Don't listen to them. They're cruel people who don't know anything about. She's ashamed of me, I whispered. My own daughter is ashamed of me. That's not true. Valencia loves you. She's just. He struggled to find words. She's just caught up in all this right now. It'll get better. But I could see in his eyes that he wasn't sure he believed it. Carmen looked furious. I'm going to go say something to them. That's completely unacceptable. No, I said firmly. Don't make a scene. This is Valencia's wedding day. I won't ruin it for her. Even then, even after everything, I was still putting my daughter's happiness ahead of my own dignity. The cocktail hour seemed to last forever. I tried to make conversation with a few other guests, but I could feel people's eyes on me, could sense the whispered conversations. The mother of the bride who came from nothing. The factory worker who'd somehow raised a daughter beautiful and smart enough to marry into the Ashworth family. I was a curiosity, an anomaly, a reminder that despite all their wealth and privilege, sometimes people from other worlds still managed to slip through the gates. Finally, mercifully, a bell chimed to announce that dinner was ready, and guests were directed into the ballroom. This was where everything would fall apart. The Ashworth ballroom was something I'd only seen in movies, a cavernous space with soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers that must have cost more than my entire apartment building, and floor-to-ceiling windows draped in silk curtains the color of champagne. The walls were painted a soft cream and adorned with gold leaf molding that caught the light from hundreds of candles placed throughout the room. Round tables draped in ivory linen filled the space, each one centered with elaborate floral arrangements of white roses, peonies, and cascading orchids. The china was edged in gold, the crystal glasses sparkled like diamonds, and even the napkins were folded into intricate shapes that looked too beautiful to use. At the far end of the ballroom, a stage had been set up for the 12-piece orchestra, not a DJ with a sound system, but an actual orchestra with violins, cellos, and a grand piano. Everything whispered of wealth so old and established that it didn't need to announce itself. A young woman in a black suit, another wedding coordinator, stood at the entrance with a seating chart, directing guests to their assigned tables. When I approached, she scanned her list with a practiced smile. Name, please. Miriam Castellanos. Her finger traced down the list, and I saw her expression shift almost imperceptibly. Ah, yes. Table 18. Table 18? I repeated, certain I'd heard wrong. I'm the mother of the bride. Yes, ma'am. Her smile remained fixed but didn't reach her eyes. Table 18 is right over there. She pointed to a table near the edge of the ballroom, close to the kitchen doors and far from the head table where Valencia and Preston would be seated. I looked across the vast space and saw that the tables were numbered starting from the head table. Table 1 was obviously where the Ashworth family would sit. Table 2 appeared to be for the wedding party. Tables 3 through 8 were clustered close to the front, presumably for VIP guests. Table 18 was practically in a different zip code. Is there some mistake? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Traditionally, the mother of the bride sits at table 1 with the immediate family. The coordinator's professional mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw pity flash across her face. I understand, Mrs. Castellanos. But this is how Mrs. Genevieve Ashworth arranged the seating. If you have concerns, you're welcome to speak with her directly. The thought of approaching Genevieve to complain about my table assignment made my stomach turn. I could already imagine her cool dismissal, her explanation about family dynamics and space constraints. "No, thank you," I said quietly. "Table 18 is fine." I made my way across the ballroom, very aware that I was walking past dozens of tables filled with guests who all seemed to know each other, who all belonged in this world in a way I never would. When I reached table 18, I found it was set for 8 people, but I was the first to arrive. I sat down carefully, smoothing my gray dress and trying to look like I had every right to be there, even though I felt like an imposter who'd somehow snuck into a world where she didn't belong. Slowly, the other 7 seats at my table filled. There was an elderly couple, the Hendersons, they introduced themselves as, who were distant cousins of the Ashworths. A middle-aged man named Douglas who worked in Preston's father's company but in some capacity that clearly didn't warrant a better table assignment. A woman named Patricia who was Valencia's former yoga instructor. And 2 younger couples who seemed confused about why they'd been seated so far from the action. None of them were close family. None of them were people who mattered in the grand scheme of this wedding. We were the overflow, the people who needed to be invited but didn't need to be seen. "So how do you know the bride and groom?" Patricia asked me brightly, making conversation as waiters began serving the first course. "I'm Valencia's mother," I said. The table went silent. Everyone exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly wondering the same thing I'd been wondering. Why was the mother of the bride sitting at table 18? Mrs. Henderson recovered first. "How wonderful. You must be so proud. Valencia looks absolutely radiant." "She does," I agreed, grateful for the kindness in the woman's voice. "She's always been beautiful, but today she's extraordinary." "I'm sure she gets that from you," Patricia said generously. Before I could respond, a commotion at the front of the ballroom drew everyone's attention. The orchestra had begun playing an elegant waltz, and Valencia and Preston were making their entrance as husband and wife. The guests erupted in applause as they walked to the head table, waving and smiling like royalty greeting their subjects. Valencia's dress caught the light from the chandeliers, making her look like she was glowing. Preston held her hand high as they walked, the perfect prince to her princess. When they reached the head table, Preston pulled out Valencia's chair with exaggerated gallantry, and she laughed, a bright, genuine laugh that I used to hear every day when she was young. I watched from table 18 as my daughter took her place at the head table, surrounded by the Ashworth family. Genevieve sat to her right, already leaning in to whisper something that made Valencia smile. Bradford Ashworth, Preston's father, raised a glass in toast. Arabella and the bridesmaids chattered excitedly around them. Valencia looked happy. She looked like she belonged there, like she'd finally found the family and the life she'd always wanted. And I was watching from the cheap seats, close enough to see but too far away to be part of it. The dinner service begins. The first course arrived, a delicate salad with microgreens, candied walnuts, and some kind of cheese I didn't recognize. It was arranged on the plate like a work of art, and I was almost afraid to disturb it with my fork. Around me, the other guests at table 18 made polite conversation about the ceremony, the beautiful venue, the perfect weather. I participated minimally, nodding and smiling when appropriate, but my attention kept drifting to the head table where Valencia was holding court. I could see her animated face as she talked to Genevieve, see the way she laughed at something Preston whispered in her ear, see how comfortable she looked in this world of crystal and champagne and old money. She looked nothing like the little girl who used to help me fold laundry in our tiny apartment, who'd do her homework at our kitchen table while I made dinner after my factory shift, who'd hug me tight and say, "I love you, Mama," every single night before bed. That little girl was gone. In her place was this elegant stranger who'd learned to navigate a world I couldn't even understand, let alone belong to. The salad was replaced with a second course, some kind of seafood dish with a sauce that probably had a French name I couldn't pronounce. I ate slowly, carefully, hyper-aware that I was being watched by the other guests at my table, all of them probably wondering what kind of mother gets seated so far from her own daughter's wedding celebration. That's when I noticed Valencia standing up from the head table. My heart leaped. Maybe she was coming to see me, to check if I was okay, to acknowledge that her mother was here celebrating her special day. But she walked in the opposite direction, toward a table near the front where several of her friends were seated. I watched as she made her rounds, hugging people, laughing, posing for photos. She moved from table to table, working the room like a politician at a fundraiser, making sure everyone felt included and appreciated. Everyone except me. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Valencia continued her circuit of the ballroom, stopping at what seemed like every table except mine. I saw her take selfies with Preston's college friends, saw her lean down to kiss an elderly Ashworth relative on the cheek, saw her throw her head back in laughter at someone's joke. And never once did she look toward table 18. "I'm sure she'll make it over here soon," Patricia said gently, clearly noticing my growing distress. "She has a lot of people to greet." But I knew better. This wasn't an oversight. This was intentional. Valencia was avoiding me, had probably hoped I would understand that my role tonight was to be present but invisible, to exist on the margins of her new life without demanding acknowledgement or attention. The first confrontation. By the time the main course arrived, a choice of beef Wellington or Chilean sea bass, both of which looked and tasted like they'd been prepared by actual culinary artists, I'd made a decision. I couldn't sit at table 18 all night, watching my daughter celebrate without me. I had to at least try to have one moment with her, one conversation, one connection on this day that should have been about family. I waited until there was a lull in the dinner service, when most guests were eating and the noise level in the ballroom had risen to a comfortable buzz of conversation and laughter. Then I stood up, smoothed my gray dress, and made my way across the ballroom toward the head table. It felt like the longest walk of my life. I was acutely aware that people were noticing, were watching the mother of the bride in her understated dress approaching the place where she clearly didn't belong. I kept my head high and my steps steady, refusing to show how terrified I was. Valencia saw me coming when I was about 10 feet away. I watched her face shift from surprise to something that looked almost like panic. She quickly said something to Genevieve, who turned to look at me with an expression of cool displeasure. "Mama," Valencia said when I reached the table, her voice artificially bright. "Is everything all right? Is there a problem with your table?" "No, sweetheart. I just wanted to come say hello. To tell you how beautiful you look, how perfect everything is." I reached out to touch her hand, but she pulled back slightly, her eyes darting around to see who was watching. "That's so sweet, Mama. Thank you." Her words were warm but her body language was closed off, defensive. "I really appreciate you being here." "Of course I'm here. Where else would I be on my daughter's wedding day?" I tried to keep my voice light, but I could hear the hurt bleeding through. Genevieve cleared her throat delicately. "Miriam, we're just about to do the toasts. Perhaps it would be better if you return to your table so we can stay on schedule?" The dismissal was clear, but I couldn't make myself move. "Not yet. Valencia, I was hoping we could take a photo together. Just the two of us. I haven't gotten a single picture with you all day." Valencia's jaw tightened. "Mama, the photographer is scheduled to do family portraits after dinner, during the designated photo time. We have a whole plan worked out with specific groupings and I'm not asking for a professional photo shoot. I just want one picture with my daughter on her wedding day. Surely that's not too much to ask." The table had gone quiet. Preston looked uncomfortable. Arabella was watching with barely concealed amusement. And Genevieve's face had hardened into a mask of polite hostility. "Mrs. Castellanos," Genevieve said, her voice like ice wrapped in velvet, "we're running on a very tight schedule tonight. Every moment has been carefully planned and timed. I'm sure you understand that disruptions, however well-intentioned, can throw everything off. I'm her mother, not a disruption." "Of course not," Genevieve replied smoothly. "But there's a time and place for everything, and right now we need to proceed with the toasts. If you'll excuse us." She turned away from me, effectively ending the conversation. I stood there for a moment, stunned by the casual cruelty of it, waiting for Valencia to say something, to defend me, to acknowledge that her mother deserved better than to be dismissed like unwanted help. But Valencia just looked at me with pleading eyes. "Mama, please. Just go back to your table. We'll talk later, I promise. The "we'll talk later" that never comes. The promise made to get rid of someone inconvenient. I'd heard it 1,000 times in my life, and I recognized it now for what it was, a polite lie. I walked back to table 18 with burning cheeks and stinging eyes, aware that half the ballroom had witnessed my rejection. When I sat down, Patricia reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. That was unconscionable. But what could I say? That my daughter had chosen her new family's approval over her own mother's feelings? That I'd been relegated to the role of embarrassing relative who needed to be managed and contained? I said nothing. I just picked up my fork and pretended to eat the beef Wellington that now tasted like ashes in my mouth. The toasts and growing humiliation. The toasts began shortly after my failed attempt to connect with Valencia. Preston's father, Bradford Ashworth, stood first, tapping his crystal glass to get everyone's attention. The ballroom fell silent as all eyes turned to the head table. "Good evening, everyone," Bradford began, his voice carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to being listened to. "What a magnificent day this has been. Genevieve and I couldn't be more thrilled to welcome Valencia into the Ashworth family." He went on to talk about Preston's accomplishments, about the values the Ashworth family held dear, about the bright future ahead for the young couple. He mentioned how impressed he'd been when he first met Valencia, her intelligence, her grace, her ambition to better herself. The phrase, "better herself," hit me like a slap. As if the life I'd given her was something shameful that needed improving. As if everything she'd been before meeting Preston was a deficit that needed to be overcome. When Bradford finished, the guests applauded politely. Then Genevieve stood, and my stomach clenched with anxiety about what she might say. "I want to echo my husband's sentiments," Genevieve began, her voice smooth and cultured. "When Preston first told us about Valencia, I'll admit I had concerns. She came from such a different background. But I've been truly impressed by how adaptable she is, how quickly she's learned our family's ways, how committed she is to becoming the kind of woman befitting an Ashworth." The ballroom remained silent, but I could feel the undercurrent of meaning in her words. Valencia had come from poverty and ignorance, but she'd successfully transformed herself into something acceptable. She'd shed her past like an embarrassing skin and emerged as someone worthy of their world. And sitting at table 18, I was the living reminder of that shameful past, the evidence that had to be hidden away so it wouldn't tarnish the beautiful story they were telling. Genevieve raised her glass. "To Valencia, may she always continue to grow and evolve into the woman she's meant to be." The guests drank to that, and Valencia smiled brightly at her mother-in-law, looking grateful for the backhanded compliment disguised as praise. Then Miguel stood up from his seat at table 2. At least my son had been given a better table assignment, and I felt a surge of hope. Miguel had always been protective of me, always proud of his working-class roots. Surely he would say something to remind everyone that Valencia came from love, even if she didn't come from money. "I'd like to say a few words about my sister," Miguel began, and I could hear the emotion in his voice. "Valencia and I grew up without a lot of material wealth, but we were rich in the things that really mattered. We had a mother who worked herself to exhaustion to make sure we had opportunities. Who went without so we could have. Who taught us that dignity and integrity mattered more than money." I saw Valencia's face tighten slightly. This wasn't the toast she'd wanted. Miguel continued, "And watching Valencia today, I see all those lessons reflected in the woman she's become. She's smart and driven and successful, yes, but more importantly, she's someone who knows the value of hard work and sacrifice because she watched our mother live those values every single day." He turned to look at me, his eyes shining with tears. "Mama, everything good in both of us came from you. We love you." The ballroom erupted in polite applause, but I could see that many of the Ashworth guests looked uncomfortable. This wasn't the sanitized story they wanted to hear. They wanted Valencia to be a Cinderella who'd been rescued from poverty, not someone whose mother was being honored for the very working-class existence they all looked down on. When Miguel sat down, Valencia leaned over and said something to him that I couldn't hear, but his face flushed and he looked away. She'd scolded him. My daughter had reprimanded her brother for saying something kind about their mother on her wedding day. The accident that changed everything. Dinner continued with an elaborate dessert course, individual chocolate soufflés with raspberry coulis and edible gold leaf. The presentation was stunning, and under any other circumstances, I might have marveled at the artistry involved. But I could barely taste the chocolate. I felt numb, disconnected, like I was watching this whole event from behind a thick pane of glass. The waiters circulated with coffee and tea, refilling wine glasses and clearing dessert plates. The room was getting louder now as the alcohol flowed more freely and guests relaxed into the celebration. The orchestra had begun playing more upbeat music, and some people were already moving toward the dance floor that had been set up at one end of the ballroom. I was debating whether I should just leave, call Lucia to come pick me up early and spare myself any more humiliation, when a waiter approached our table with a fresh bottle of red wine. "More wine, ma'am?" he asked, gesturing to my glass. I was about to decline when Mrs. Henderson said, "Oh, yes please. This is an excellent vintage. You should try some, Miriam." I didn't really want more wine, I'd barely touched what I already had, but I nodded, not wanting to seem ungrateful for her attempts to include me in the table's conversation. The waiter reached across to pour into my glass, which was sitting near the edge of the table. What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion. His sleeve caught on the elaborate floral centerpiece. The arrangement tilted. The waiter jerked back reflexively, and the wine bottle in his hand swung wide. Red wine splashed across the white tablecloth, across the lap of my gray dress, and, horrifyingly, across the cream-colored dress of the woman sitting next to me. Patricia, the yoga instructor, shrieked and jumped up from her chair. "Oh my God. This dress is designer. I spent $2,000 on this dress." "I'm so sorry," the waiter gasped, his face pale with panic. "I'm so sorry, it was an accident." "An accident?" Patricia's voice rose to a pitch that carried across the ballroom. "Look at this. It's completely ruined." The commotion drew everyone's attention. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. The orchestra trailed off mid-song. And suddenly, everyone in the ballroom was staring at our table, at the spreading red wine stain, at Patricia's ruined dress, at me sitting there with wine soaking into my lap. I could feel the judgment radiating from every direction. Even though it hadn't been my fault, even though I hadn't touched the wine bottle, I was somehow implicated in this disaster simply by proximity. "What's going on over there?" I heard someone say. "Some kind of accident at one of the back tables." How embarrassing. And then I heard the click-click-click of high heels on the marble floor, moving fast, and I knew without looking that Valencia was coming. She appeared beside our table, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "What happened?" The waiter started to explain, but Patricia cut him off. "Your mother's table just ruined my dress. This is completely unacceptable." I started to say, but Valencia wasn't listening to me. She was looking at the wine-stained tablecloth, at Patricia's ruined dress, at me sitting there soaked in red wine. And I could see the calculation in her eyes. This was her worst nightmare coming true. Her mother, causing a scene, drawing negative attention, disrupting the perfect wedding she'd worked so hard to create. "I'm so sorry," Valencia said to Patricia, her voice tight. "Please, we'll pay for the dress, of course. And dry cleaning for everyone affected. It's not about the money," Patricia said, though clearly it was at least partly about the money. "It's about the disruption, the carelessness." "It was an accident," I said firmly, finding my voice. The waiter's sleeve caught the centerpiece. No one was being careless. Valencia's eyes snapped to me, and I saw something in them I'd never seen before directed at me, pure, undiluted rage. She stopped herself, taking a deep breath. Then, in a lower voice that somehow sounded more dangerous, "Mama, please don't make this worse." "I'm not making anything worse. I'm simply explaining what happened." "You're making a scene." The words burst out of her, louder than she'd intended. Several nearby tables had definitely heard. Genevieve appeared beside Valencia, her face a mask of barely controlled displeasure. "Valencia, darling, why don't you return to your table?" I'll handle this situation. But Valencia wasn't done. Something had broken open in her, all the stress and anxiety and shame she'd been holding in for months, and it was all directed at me. Do you know how humiliating this is? She hissed at me, her voice low but venomous. I've spent months trying to make sure everything was perfect, trying to make sure there were no problems, no embarrassments, nothing that would reflect badly on me or Preston or his family. And you still managed to cause a scene. Valencia, I didn't cause anything. The waiter. You're here. That's enough. You being here, sitting at a table, existing in this space, it's all I could do to make sure you didn't ruin everything just by being visible. The words hung in the air between us. Around us, I was aware of the other guests at table 18 staring in shock. Of guests at nearby tables leaning in to hear better. Of the waitstaff frozen in place, not knowing what to do. Valencia, I said quietly, trying to reach through her anger to the daughter I'd raised, I'm your mother. And I'm ashamed of that. The words exploded out of her. Do you understand? I'm ashamed. Ashamed of where I came from, ashamed of our tiny apartment and your factory job and the fact that you never even graduated high school. Ashamed that when people ask about my family, I have to explain that my mother is uneducated and poor and completely unsuited to this world I'm trying to build. Each word was like a knife to my chest. I could see Miguel across the ballroom, starting to stand up, his face furious. I could see some guests looking horrified, others looking fascinated by the drama unfolding. But all I could really see was my daughter's face, contorted with a shame so deep it had twisted into hatred. I worked 3 jobs to put you through college, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And I'm supposed to be grateful for that forever? Supposed to drag you along into every part of my new life, letting you embarrass me in front of people who matter? I matter, I said. I'm your mother. I matter. Valencia laughed, a cruel sound I'd never heard from her before. You're a reminder of everything I've worked so hard to leave behind. And tonight, you couldn't even sit quietly at your table without causing problems. Genevieve placed a hand on Valencia's arm. Darling, perhaps we should. But Valencia shook her off. She was past caring about propriety or appearances now. The mask had fully slipped, and everyone could see the ugly truth underneath. You know what? Valencia said, her voice getting louder. I should have just told you not to come. I should have had the wedding without you. But Miguel convinced me that it would look bad, that people would ask questions. So I invited you and tried to keep you hidden away where you wouldn't be too visible, too obvious, too much of an embarrassment. Valencia. Miguel was pushing through the crowd now, but he was too far away to stop what was happening. You want to know why you were at table 18? Valencia continued, her voice rising to ensure everyone in the ballroom could hear. Because I didn't want you near me. I didn't want you in the family photos or the important conversations or anywhere that people of actual importance might have to interact with you. She was breathing hard now, her carefully applied makeup starting to run as tears of rage streaked down her face. You're stupid and uneducated and you don't belong in my life anymore. You were useful when I needed someone to work overtime to pay my tuition, useful when I needed somewhere to stay during school breaks, useful as a stepping stone to get me out of poverty. But now? Now you're just an embarrassment I can't wait to be rid of. The ballroom had gone completely silent. 200 people watching my daughter publicly disown me, call me stupid, reduce our entire relationship to a transaction where I'd been nothing but a tool for her advancement. I stood up slowly, wine still dripping from my dress onto the marble floor. My hands were trembling, but my voice when I spoke was steady. I'm sorry you feel that way, Valencia. She wasn't done. And this? She gestured wildly at the wine-stained table, at Patricia's ruined dress, at me standing there soaked and humiliated. This is exactly why I wanted you hidden away. Because you're incapable of navigating a civilized event without causing some kind of problem. A staff member appeared beside us holding a mop and bucket, presumably to clean up the wine spill. But Valencia grabbed them from his hands and thrust them toward me. Here, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. Clean it up. At least that's something you know how to do, right? You've spent your whole life cleaning up messes and mopping floors. So go ahead, show everyone what you're actually good for. She held out the mop, and I stared at it, then at her face, then at the 200 guests watching this moment that would define me forever in their eyes. The mother of the bride being handed a mop by her own daughter. Being told to clean up like hired help. Being reduced to nothing more than a servant in front of everyone who had already decided I didn't belong. I could see Miguel finally reaching us, his face purple with rage. I could see some guests looking away, too uncomfortable to watch. I could see others leaning forward eagerly, thrilled by the drama. And I could see Genevieve watching with a small, satisfied smile, pleased that the problem of Valencia's embarrassing mother was finally being dealt with publicly and decisively. I took the mop from Valencia's hands. Not because I was going to use it, but because I wanted to feel the weight of it, wanted to fully understand what my daughter thought of me. Then I set it carefully on the floor, letting it clatter against the marble. I gave you everything, I said quietly, looking into Valencia's eyes one last time. Everything I had, everything I was, everything I could possibly sacrifice. I worked until my hands bled. I went without food so you could eat. I gave up any chance at my own happiness so you could have opportunities. Mama, for just a second, something flickered in Valencia's eyes. Doubt, maybe. Or regret. And you know what I've learned tonight? I continued. That none of it mattered. Because you were always going to be ashamed of me. No amount of sacrifice would ever be enough to earn your respect. No amount of love would ever be enough to make you proud to call me your mother. I picked up my small purse from the table. I'm leaving now. Enjoy your perfect wedding with your perfect new family and your perfect life that has no room for the woman who made it all possible. I walked toward the ballroom exit with my head held high, even though red wine was still dripping from my dress and every eye in the room was on me. I didn't look back. I didn't give Valencia the satisfaction of seeing me cry. But as I reached the doorway, I heard her voice one last time, pitched loud enough to ensure I heard. Good riddance. I called Lucia from the Ashworth estate driveway, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. The wine had dried into stiff patches on my gray dress, and the September night air had turned cold against my skin. I stood under one of the ornate iron lanterns that lined the driveway, watching luxury cars come and go, watching guests laugh and celebrate while I waited to be rescued from my own daughter's wedding. Miriam? What's wrong? You sound. Can you come get me? My voice cracked. Please, Lucia. I need to leave. She didn't ask questions. I'm already in my car. 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes felt like hours. I stood in the shadows, hoping no one would see me, hoping I could disappear completely. A few guests passed by on their way to their cars, people who'd witnessed my humiliation, who'd watched Valencia call me stupid and uneducated, who'd seen her hand me a mop in front of 200 people. Some averted their eyes quickly, embarrassed. Others stared openly, whispering to their companions. One woman actually pulled out her phone and took a picture of me standing there in my wine-stained dress, probably already composing the social media post about the drama at the Ashworth wedding. When Lucia's Toyota finally pulled up, I practically ran to it, yanking open the door and collapsing into the passenger seat. Drive, I said. Please, just drive. Lucia took one look at my face, at my ruined dress, at the tears finally streaming down my cheeks, and put the car in gear without a word. We were halfway back to Riverside before she spoke. Tell me what happened. So I did. I told her everything, from being seated at table 18 to Valencia's explosion to the mop to the final, good riddance, that still echoed in my ears. By the time I finished, we were pulling into my apartment complex parking lot, and I was sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. Lucia parked and turned to me, her eyes blazing with fury. That girl needs to be taught a lesson. After everything you sacrificed for her. She's ashamed of me, I whispered. My own daughter is ashamed of who I am. Then she's a fool. Lucia grabbed my hand. Miriam, you are one of the strongest, most dignified women I've ever known. You raised 3 children alone, worked yourself to exhaustion to give them opportunities, and never once complained or asked for anything in return. If Valencia can't see that, if she values money and status over the mother who gave her everything, then she doesn't deserve you. I wanted to believe her. But all I could see was Valencia's face, twisted with contempt, telling me I was stupid and uneducated, telling me I didn't belong in her life anymore. Lucia helped me inside, made me tea, and stayed with me until nearly midnight. When she finally left, I sat alone in my small apartment, surrounded by photos of Valencia at various ages, baby pictures, school photos, graduation pictures, and wondered how the smiling child in these frames had turned into the woman who'd publicly disowned me. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Valencia's voice. You're stupid and uneducated and you don't belong in my life anymore. But as the night wore on and gave way to a gray dawn, something shifted inside me. The grief and hurt were still there, sharp and cutting. But underneath them, something else was growing. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind. The cold, calculated kind that comes from years of being underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed as stupid simply because you didn't have a diploma on your wall. Valencia thought I was just an embarrassing burden from her past, something to be hidden away and eventually discarded. The Ashworths thought I was a nobody, a poor factory worker who didn't understand their sophisticated world. They were all wrong. And it was time they learned exactly how wrong they were. The phone call that changed everything. Sunday morning came with relentless sunshine, the kind of bright, cheerful day that felt like an insult given how I felt inside. I'd finally fallen into a fitful sleep around 5 a.m., only to be jolted awake 3 hours later by my phone ringing. Miguel's name flashed on the screen. "Mijo," I said, my voice hoarse from crying. "Mama." His voice was tight with barely controlled fury. "Carmen and I left the wedding right after you did. We couldn't stay there after what Valencia did to you. After what she said. You didn't have to leave." "Yes, we did. Mama, what she said to you, how she treated you. I've never been so ashamed of my own sister. Carmen wanted to physically drag her out of that ballroom and make her apologize to you in front of everyone." Despite everything, I smiled slightly at the image. Carmen was small but fierce, exactly the kind of daughter-in-law who would fight for her husband's family. "I don't want an apology," I said quietly. "Not anymore. An apology would just be words, Miguel. It wouldn't change what she really thinks of me." "Then what do you want?" "Because I swear to God, Mama, I will make this right somehow. Valencia can't just." "Miguel." I interrupted him gently. "I need to tell you something. Something I've kept secret for a very long time. Something that changes everything." There was a pause. "What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath, gathering the courage to finally speak the truth I'd held inside for 25 years. "Do you remember when your father died? When you were 12 and Valencia was 10? "Of course I remember." "And do you remember how we managed to stay in our apartment, how I was able to keep you both in school, how we never went completely under even though I was just a factory worker with 3 kids to support?" "You worked 3 jobs, Miguel said slowly. "You worked yourself to exhaustion." "I did work 3 jobs. But that's not why we survived." I closed my eyes, seeing the past with painful clarity. "Your father had a life insurance policy. Not a big one, $50,000. It was supposed to be our safety net, our way to keep going if something happened to him." "Okay." But a week after the funeral, I got a visit from Bradford Ashworth. Preston's father. Miguel's sharp intake of breath told me he understood this was going somewhere significant. Bradford came to our apartment, this same apartment I'm living in now, in his expensive suit, with his expensive car parked outside. He said he'd heard about your father's death and wanted to offer his condolences. But that wasn't really why he came. I could picture that day so clearly. Bradford standing in my tiny living room, looking at our worn furniture and peeling wallpaper with barely disguised distaste, while I'd stood there in my grief and exhaustion, trying to figure out why one of Thornbury Heights' wealthiest men was in my home. He told me that your father had done some work for the Ashworth Pharmaceutical Company years before, back when he was an engineer. Contract work, helping them solve a problem with one of their manufacturing processes. Your father had designed a new filtration system that made their production faster and more cost-effective. I didn't know Dad worked for them. It was before you were born. Just a few months of consulting work. But Bradford said your father had signed away all rights to his designs as part of the contract. He said the Ashworth Company owned everything your father had created during that time. Miguel was quiet, waiting for the rest. Then he told me that the filtration system your father designed had become the foundation for their most profitable product line. That it had made the Ashworth family hundreds of millions of dollars over the past 20 years. And that according to the contract your father signed, we weren't entitled to a single penny of it. That bastard, Miguel breathed. But here's the thing, Mijo. I didn't believe him. Your father was smart, careful about legal matters. So I took the contract Bradford showed me to a lawyer, used some of the life insurance money to pay for a consultation. My hands trembled as I remembered that meeting, the lawyer's shocked face as he'd read through the contract. The lawyer told me the contract was fraudulent. That your father's signature had been forged. That based on the dates and terms, it was clear the Ashworth Company had created a fake contract after your father died, counting on the fact that a poor widow wouldn't have the resources to fight them. Oh my God, Miguel whispered. Mama, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you sue them? Because Bradford made me an offer. My voice hardened with the memory. He said that if I stayed quiet, if I never pursued the matter legally, he would make sure you and your siblings got certain opportunities. He said he could arrange for scholarships, for internships, for doors to open that would otherwise be closed to children of a poor factory worker. He bought your silence. He bought my children's futures. Or so I thought. I laughed bitterly. He kept his word about some of it. That scholarship Valencia got to the university, I always told you it was based on her grades, and her grades were excellent. But Bradford made sure she got it. He pulled strings, made phone calls. He gave her access to a world she could never have entered otherwise. And you stayed silent about the fraud. I stayed silent because I thought I was doing what was best for my children. I thought that exposing the Ashworth's theft would lead to a legal battle we couldn't afford, that even if we won, it would take years and mark you all as troublemakers, as people who sued powerful families. I thought silence was the price I had to pay for your opportunities. Miguel was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was shaking. Does Valencia know any of this? No. None of you knew. I thought if you didn't know, you couldn't be tainted by it. You could accept the opportunities that came your way without feeling like they were built on fraud and silence. But Valencia's whole life with Preston, her wedding to him, it's all built on money that should have been ours. Money the Ashworths stole from our father. Yes. And she just publicly humiliated and disowned the mother who sacrificed everything, including justice for our father, to give her the chances that led her to that wedding. Yes. Another long silence. Then, what are you going to do? I looked around my small apartment, at the photos of my children, at the simple life I'd built from nothing while the Ashworths lived in luxury on money that should have been mine. Money I could have used to give my children an easier life, to send them all to good schools, to buy a house instead of renting this tiny apartment for 25 years. Money I'd let them keep because I'd been stupid enough to believe that silence would earn my children a better future. I'm going to tell the truth, I said quietly. All of it. And I'm going to let Valencia and her new family deal with the consequences. The investigation begins. Monday morning, I called in sick to my factory job for the first time in 5 years. Then I went to the bank and accessed my safety deposit box, pulling out the manila envelope I'd stored there a quarter-century ago. Inside was everything I'd kept from that terrible week after my husband's death. The original forged contract Bradford had shown me. Copies of my husband's real contracts with other companies, showing his genuine signature for comparison. The lawyer's analysis documenting the fraud. Letters from Bradford making his offer to secure my silence. All the evidence of a crime that powerful people thought they'd buried under poverty and grief. I'd kept it all these years, telling myself it was insurance, that someday I might need it. But really, I'd kept it because I'd never truly forgiven the Ashworths for what they'd done. I just convinced myself that my children's opportunities mattered more than justice. Now I knew better. The opportunities had been a trap, a way to compromise me, to make sure I'd never speak up. And Valencia had proven that no amount of silence or sacrifice would ever be enough. She'd always be ashamed of me, always see me as less than, always choose the Ashworth money and status over her own mother. So there was nothing left to protect. Nothing left to lose. I spread the documents across my kitchen table and began making phone calls. The first was to a lawyer Miguel recommended, not the one I'd seen 25 years ago, who'd long since retired, but a young woman named Sandra Chen who specialized in corporate fraud and had a reputation for taking on powerful families. Mrs. Castellanos, Sandra said when I laid out the story, what you're describing is fraud, forgery, and potentially racketeering. The statute of limitations might be complicated, but if you have documentation. I have everything. I pushed the envelope across her desk. Every piece of evidence I collected back then. I've kept it safe all these years. Sandra's eyes widened as she examined the documents. This is damning. The forged signature is obvious once you see it compared to the real one. And these letters from Bradford Ashworth essentially admitting to the fraud while offering you hush money. Mrs. Castellanos, why didn't you pursue this before? Because I was scared. Because I was poor and alone and they were powerful and rich. Because they promised my children opportunities if I stayed quiet. I met her eyes. But I'm not scared anymore. Good. Sandra smiled grimly. Because with this evidence, we can take them down. All of them. The confrontation with Bradford. Sandra advised me that the smart move was to file a lawsuit quietly, to let the legal system handle everything through official channels. But I didn't want smart. I wanted justice. And I wanted the Ashworths to know, face to face, that the woman they dismissed as stupid and uneducated had outmaneuvered them for 25 years. So on Wednesday morning, 3 days after Valencia's wedding, I drove back to Thornbury Heights. But this time I wasn't going as the embarrassed mother in a cheap dress, hoping to blend into the background. I was going as a woman with evidence of federal crimes and the determination to use it. The Ashworth Pharmaceutical Company headquarters was a gleaming glass tower in the center of Thornbury Heights business district. I'd never been inside before, why would someone like me have any business in such a place? But I walked through those polished doors with my head held high and my manila envelope held tight. I'm here to see Bradford Ashworth, I told the receptionist, a young woman with perfect hair and a practiced smile. Do you have an appointment? No. But tell him Miriam Castellanos needs to speak with him about my late husband's work for this company. Tell him it's urgent. The receptionist's smile faltered. I'm not sure Mr. Ashworth is available. Tell him if he doesn't see me in the next 10 minutes, my next stop is the FBI field office downtown. Her eyes widened. She picked up her phone, spoke in hushed tones, and then looked up at me with barely concealed shock. Mr. Ashworth will see you now. 20th floor, corner office. The elevator ride up felt surreal. I'd spent 25 years in a factory, operating machinery and packing boxes. Now I was riding in a glass elevator with a view of the entire city, heading to confront one of the wealthiest, most powerful men in the state. Bradford's office was exactly what I expected, enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive furniture, and photographs on the walls showing him with governors, senators, even a president. He stood when I entered, and for just a second, I saw surprise flash across his face. Miriam. This is unexpected. I heard about the incident at the wedding. I'm sorry you had to experience such an uncomfortable situation. Are you? I set my envelope on his massive desk. Because from what I saw, your wife looked pretty satisfied while my daughter publicly humiliated me. Bradford's expression shifted to something more guarded. I'm sure emotions were running high. Weddings can be stressful. I'm not here to talk about the wedding. I opened the envelope and pulled out the documents, spreading them across his pristine desk. I'm here to talk about fraud. All the blood drained from Bradford's face. He stared at the papers, his own letters, the forged contract, the analysis documenting the crime, like they were poisonous snakes that had suddenly appeared in his office. Where did you get these? His voice was barely a whisper. I've had them for 25 years. Kept them safe, kept them secret, because you convinced me that my children's futures depended on my silence. You made me believe that speaking up would hurt them, that the best thing I could do as a mother was let you get away with stealing from my dead husband. Miriam, if this is about money. It's not about money. The words exploded out of me. It was never about money. It was about doing right by my children. About giving them chances in a world that was stacked against them. About sacrificing everything, including justice, because I thought that's what a good mother did. I leaned forward, my hands flat on his desk. But you know what I learned on Saturday night? I learned that all my sacrifice was for nothing. My daughter, the one I stayed silent for, the one who benefited most from your guilty conscience and your hush money, called me stupid and uneducated in front of 200 people. Told me I was an embarrassment she couldn't wait to be rid of. Handed me a mop and told me to clean up because that's all I'm good for. Bradford sat down heavily in his chair. Valencia said that to you? Your son's wife said that to me. The woman who's now part of your family, who has access to your money and your name and your social standing. The woman you welcomed into the Ashworth dynasty. I gathered up the papers. And I realized something. All these years, I protected you because I thought I was protecting my daughter. But she doesn't need protection from the truth. She needs to face it. What are you going to do? I'm going to file a lawsuit. My lawyer says we have a strong case for fraud, forgery, and theft. The statute of limitations is complicated, but with this evidence, she thinks we can prevail. At minimum, we'll expose what you did. Everyone will know that the Ashworth fortune was built partly on stolen intellectual property, that you forged documents and bribed a widow to cover your crimes. I'll fight you. But Bradford's voice lacked conviction. I have resources you can't imagine. And I have the truth. I have evidence. And I have nothing left to lose. I headed for the door, then turned back. Oh, and Bradford? Your son just married into a family you defrauded. Think about how that's going to look when this goes public. Think about how your wife's precious social standing is going to survive when everyone knows the Ashworths are thieves. I left him sitting there, surrounded by his expensive furniture and his photographs with powerful people, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him look. The call from Valencia. Valencia called that night. I'd been expecting it. Bradford had probably contacted her immediately, warning her about the storm that was coming. I almost didn't answer. Part of me wanted to let her wonder, let her panic, let her experience even a fraction of the uncertainty and fear I'd lived with for 25 years. But I answered. Mama. Her voice was strained, lacking the warmth that used to be there when she called me that. We need to talk. Do we? Bradford called. He said you went to his office, that you're threatening to sue the family for something that happened before I was even born. He said you have some kind of evidence about fraud? I do. Mama, what are you doing? Do you understand what this will do to my marriage, to my life? I felt a cold, bitter laugh escape my throat. Do I understand? Valencia, do you understand what your actions at your wedding did to me? I was stressed. I said things I didn't mean. You meant every word. I kept my voice steady, refusing to let her hear how much it still hurt. You called me stupid and uneducated. You told me I was an embarrassment you couldn't wait to be rid of. You handed me a mop in front of 200 people and told me cleaning was all I was good for. I'm sorry. I was overwhelmed and angry about the wine spill, and I lashed out. But this? Mama, this is going to destroy everything. Like you destroyed me? Silence. Then, quietly, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. Now I was angry, truly angry. You publicly disowned your mother at your own wedding. You reduced our entire relationship to a transaction where I was only useful as a stepping stone for your ambitions. You made it clear that everything I sacrificed, everything I gave up, every night I went to bed hungry so you could eat, none of it mattered because I was still just an embarrassment to be hidden away. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. And you know what? It helped me realize something. I've spent 25 years keeping a secret to protect you. Staying silent about a crime because I thought it would give you a better life. But you were right about one thing, I was stupid. Stupid to think that my silence would earn your respect. Stupid to believe that sacrificing justice would somehow make you love me enough not to be ashamed of who I am. Mama, please. If you do this, if you sue the Ashworths, my marriage will be destroyed. Preston's family will never forgive me. I'll lose everything. Like I lost my daughter? You haven't lost me. Haven't I? Tell me, Valencia, when did you plan to speak to me again after the wedding? When was the next time you were going to acknowledge my existence? The silence told me everything I needed to know. That's what I thought. I felt tears streaming down my face but kept my voice steady. You were going to cut me out of your life completely. Make a clean break from your embarrassing past. Pretend you came from nowhere so you could fit better into the Ashworth world. That's not true. Isn't it? When was the next family event I would have been invited to? When would you have introduced me to your new friends? When would you have posted a photo of us together on your social media? Silence. You can't answer because we both know the truth. I was already gone from your life. You just hadn't made it official yet. So this is revenge? Valencia's voice turned cold. You're going to destroy my marriage because I hurt your feelings at my wedding? This isn't revenge, Valencia. This is justice. 25 years late, but still justice. I took a deep breath. Your father-in-law stole from your father. He forged documents, bribed me into silence, and built part of his fortune on intellectual property that should have been ours. Did you know that? Did Bradford tell you that the money you're living on, the wealth you married into, some of it should have been yours by right? What are you talking about? So I told her. Everything. The filtration system her father designed. The forged contract. Bradford's offer to secure my silence with opportunities for my children. The choice I'd made to protect her future at the expense of justice. When I finished, Valencia was crying. Mama, I didn't know. I never knew any of this. Of course you didn't. Because I protected you. Like I've always protected you. Like I sacrificed everything to protect you. My voice hardened. But I'm done protecting you, Valencia. You made it clear that my protection wasn't worth anything to you anyway. So now you can face the consequences of the choices you've made. What choices? I didn't do anything wrong. You chose them over me. You chose their money and their status and their approval over your own mother. And now you're going to have to decide, do you want to be part of a family built on fraud and theft, or do you want to stand up for what's right? You're asking me to choose between you and my husband. No. I'm asking you to choose between truth and lies. Between justice and complicity. Between being the person I raised you to be and being the person the Ashworths turned you into. I can't, her voice broke. Mama, I can't lose Preston. I can't lose this life. Please. Please don't do this. And there it was. The final confirmation of what I'd already known. Given a choice between justice and her privileged new life, Valencia would choose the life. Every time. I'm filing the lawsuit tomorrow, I said quietly. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this. I'm sorry it's going to be painful. But Valencia, I spent 25 years being sorry for who I was, apologizing for my lack of education, my poverty, my inability to fit into your desired world. I'm done apologizing. Mama. I love you. I will always love you. But I won't sacrifice justice again. Not even for you. I hung up before she could respond. The lawsuit and the fallout. The lawsuit was filed on Friday, exactly 1 week after Valencia's wedding. Sandra had moved fast, leveraging the strength of our evidence to get immediate attention from the courts. By Monday, it was in the news. Ashworth Pharmaceutical accused of 25-year-old fraud, read the headline in the Thornbury Heights Tribune. The article detailed the accusations, included quotes from Sandra about the forged contracts and the compelling evidence we had, and noted that Bradford Ashworth had declined to comment. By Tuesday, the story had gone regional. By Wednesday, national news outlets were picking it up, not just because of the fraud allegations, but because of the human interest angle. Poor widow stays silent for 25 years to protect her children's futures. Mother of the bride sues her daughter's new in-laws 1 week after humiliating wedding incident. The narrative practically wrote itself. My phone didn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted interviews. Old friends and distant relatives called to ask if the stories were true. Miguel and Carmen came to stay with me, worried about the stress and the media attention. And Valencia called 3 times a day, increasingly desperate, begging me to drop the lawsuit. I didn't answer her calls. But I did answer when Preston called on Thursday afternoon. Mrs. Castellanos, he said formally, I think we need to talk about this situation. I'm not dropping the lawsuit, if that's what you're calling about. I'm calling because I just learned the full truth about what my father did. And about what Valencia said to you at our wedding. His voice was tight with anger, but I couldn't tell if the anger was directed at me or at his own family. I want you to know that I didn't know about any of this. The fraud, my father's criminal actions, the way you were treated. Does it matter? You married into a family built partly on stolen money. You sat at that head table while your mother congratulated herself on Valencia, evolving past her embarrassing background. You watched your wife hand me a mop and didn't say a word. I should have said something. I should have stopped her. But I was in shock, I didn't know how to. He took a breath. That's not an excuse. I failed you. I failed to stand up for what was right. I was surprised by his honesty. What are you going to do about it? I've already confronted my father. Told him that if he doesn't settle with you for the full amount owed, plus interest for 25 years, I'll testify against him in court. I've also told my mother that her treatment of you was unacceptable and that she needs to apologize publicly. Genevieve Ashworth would never apologize to someone like me. Then she'll lose her son. Preston's voice was firm. Mrs. Castellanos, my wife hurt you terribly. My family treated you abominably. And my father committed crimes that have haunted you for a quarter century. I can't fix all of that. But I can try to make it right going forward. What about Valencia? What does she think about all this? A long pause. Valencia is struggling. She's caught between loyalty to me and fear of what this lawsuit will do to our lives. She wants you to drop it. She thinks if we all just pretend none of this happened, everything can go back to normal. There is no normal. There never will be again. I know. And I've told her that. I've told her that she needs to apologize to you, that she needs to acknowledge what she said and did. But she's... He trailed off. She's ashamed, I finished. But not of how she treated me. She's ashamed that her mother is fighting back. Mrs. Castellanos. Tell Valencia that if she wants to talk to me, she can come here. To my apartment in Riverside, the neighborhood she's spent years trying to pretend she didn't grow up in. Tell her she can come face the reality of who her mother is and what her family did. And then maybe we can talk about forgiveness. I'll tell her. He hung up, and I sat in my small apartment, waiting to see if my daughter would swallow her pride enough to come home. The final confrontation and resolution. Valencia showed up on Friday evening, exactly 2 weeks after her wedding. She came alone, driving Preston's Mercedes, already unable to imagine using public transportation or a taxi like normal people. I watched from my window as she sat in the car for 10 minutes, working up the courage to walk into the building where she'd lived for 18 years. When she finally emerged, she looked smaller somehow, less polished than usual. She wore jeans and a plain sweater, her hair pulled back simply, her face bare of makeup except for the evidence that she'd been crying. I buzzed her up without speaking, then opened my apartment door and waited. She walked down the hallway slowly, like she was approaching an execution. When she reached my doorway, she stopped, her eyes scanning the familiar space, the worn furniture, the small kitchen, the photos on the walls documenting a life of poverty and struggle and fierce maternal love. "Mama," she whispered. "Come in." She stepped inside, and I saw her shoulders shake with a suppressed sob. "Everything looks the same. Why would it look different? I'm still the same person I've always been. Poor, uneducated, living in a tiny apartment in Riverside. The same woman who embarrassed you at your wedding. Don't." Valencia's voice broke. "Please don't." "Don't what?" "Don't speak the truth. That's what you wanted, isn't it? For me to stay silent about uncomfortable truths? Like I stayed silent for 25 years about your father-in-law's crimes? I'm sorry." The words rushed out of her. "Mama, I'm so sorry. For what I said at the wedding, for how I treated you, for being ashamed when I should have been proud. I was wrong about everything. Sit down, Valencia." She sat on the old couch, in the same spot where she used to sit as a child doing homework. I sat across from her in my armchair, the one I'd bought secondhand 20 years ago and never been able to afford to replace. "Why are you sorry?" I asked. "Because you actually regret what you said, or because the lawsuit is making your life difficult?" "Both." At least she was honest. "I do regret it, Mama. I've been replaying that night over and over in my mind, seeing your face when I said those horrible things, and I hate myself for it. But you also want me to drop the lawsuit?" "Yes." She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Mama, please. Bradford has agreed to pay you. Whatever the amount is that he owes you, whatever the court decides is fair, he'll pay it without fighting. Preston made him agree. But if this goes to trial, if all the details come out publicly, it's going to destroy the family. The company's stock is already falling. Their reputation is damaged. And Preston and I..." She stopped, tears streaming down her face. "Preston and you what? We might not survive this. The pressure, the media attention, his family's anger at me for being your daughter, for bringing this all down on them. They blame me, Mama. They say I should have controlled you, should have kept you quiet." "Controlled me?" I laughed bitterly. "Like I'm a dog that needs training. That's not what I meant. Isn't it? Valencia, your entire relationship with me for the past few years has been about control. Controlling what I wear, what I say, where I sit, when I speak. Controlling me so I wouldn't embarrass you in front of the people whose approval you desperately wanted. I was wrong." She was sobbing now. "I was so wrong about all of it. I got caught up in their world, in their values, and I lost sight of what really mattered. I lost sight of you, of everything you sacrificed for me. Yes, you did. But I'm here now. I'm trying to make it right. Mama, please, tell me what I need to do. How can I fix this?" I looked at my daughter, my beautiful, broken daughter who'd chased status and wealth right into a trap of her own making, and felt my heart crack open. "You can't fix it, Valencia. Not completely. The words you said, the way you treated me, that can't be unsaid or undone. But you can make a choice right now about who you want to be going forward." Valencia wiped her eyes. "What does that mean?" "It means you testify. Against Bradford, against the fraud. You tell the truth about what he did to our family, even though he's your father-in-law. You stand with me, publicly, and you show the world that you're not ashamed of where you came from. Mama, if I do that, the Ashworths will never forgive me. Genevieve will make sure I'm cut out of the family completely. Preston might even." "Preston is already on my side," I interrupted. "He's the one who told Bradford to settle. He's the one who said he'd testify against his own father if necessary. Your husband has more integrity than his entire family combined. The question is, do you? Valencia buried her face in her hands, her whole body shaking with sobs. I'm so scared. Scared of losing everything I worked so hard to get. Scared of going back to being poor, to being nobody. You were never nobody, Valencia. You were my daughter. You were a smart, strong, beautiful woman who came from nothing and built something. But somewhere along the way, you started believing that your worth was tied to their money, their status, their approval. You forgot that the best parts of you, your intelligence, your determination, your strength, those came from us. From your father who designed revolutionary filtration systems. From your mother who worked 3 jobs and never gave up. From a family that survived poverty and loss and kept going. I moved to sit beside her on the couch, taking her hand. I don't need you to choose between me and Preston. He's a good man, and he loves you. What I need is for you to choose between truth and lies. Between the woman I raised and the woman the Ashworths wanted you to become. Valencia looked at me, her eyes red and swollen. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You are. Because you're my daughter. And whatever else you might have forgotten about where you came from, you need to remember this. We don't give up, and we don't hide from the truth. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at our joined hands. Then, so softly I almost didn't hear, what if Preston leaves me? Then he wasn't the man you thought he was. But I don't think he will. I think he's waiting to see if you're the woman he thought you were. Valencia took a shaky breath. If I testify, if I stand with you publicly, can you forgive me? For what I said, for how I treated you? I can forgive you. But Valencia, you also need to forgive yourself. And you need to figure out who you are when you're not trying to be what everyone else wants you to be. She nodded slowly, then threw her arms around me, holding on like she had when she was a little girl waking up from a nightmare. I'm so sorry, Mama. I'm so sorry. I held her tight, this daughter I'd lost and was now, maybe, starting to get back. I know, mi amor. I know. 3 months later, the settlement. The lawsuit never went to trial. With Preston's testimony corroborating my evidence, and with Valencia standing publicly beside me, giving a tearful interview to the local news about how her father-in-law had defrauded her family, Bradford's lawyers advised him to settle immediately. The settlement was for $8.7 million, the estimated value of what my husband's filtration system had generated for Ashworth Pharmaceutical over 25 years, plus interest and damages. It was more money than I'd ever imagined having, more than I knew what to do with. The first thing I did was pay off Miguel's mortgage. The second was to set up college funds for all my grandchildren. The third was to establish a scholarship fund at the local community college for adult students going back to school, people like me who'd never gotten the chance to finish their education but deserved opportunities anyway. The rest I invested conservatively, with enough to live on comfortably but not extravagantly. I didn't want to become the kind of person who valued money over relationships. I'd seen where that led. Bradford resigned from Ashworth Pharmaceutical amid the scandal. Genevieve filed for divorce, claiming she'd had no knowledge of her husband's crimes, a claim no one really believed but couldn't disprove. The company's stock took a hit but eventually recovered. Rich families always seem to land on their feet. Valencia and Preston stayed together, though they moved out of Thornbury Heights to a modest house in a middle-class neighborhood halfway between Riverside and Preston's office. Preston had distanced himself from his family's business, taking a position at a smaller architectural firm where his name didn't carry the weight of scandal. It wasn't easy for them. Preston's trust fund had been frozen pending the resolution of the lawsuit, and they were living on his salary alone, a far cry from the luxury Valencia had briefly enjoyed. But I watched them figure it out together, watched Valencia learn to cook instead of eating out every night, watched them shop at discount stores and clip coupons and do all the small, unglamorous things that normal people did. And I watched my daughter slowly become someone I recognized again. 6 months later, the real ending. On a Saturday morning in March, 6 months after her wedding, Valencia showed up at my apartment with a box of pastries from the bakery where I used to buy day-old bread when money was tight. I remember you always said these were the best in the city, she said, setting them on my kitchen table. But we could never afford the fresh ones. I smiled. They taste even better when they're not stale. We sat at my small kitchen table, the same table where she'd done her homework as a child, where I'd paid bills and worried about making rent, where I'd spread out Bradford's fraudulent contract 25 years ago and tried to decide what to do. "Mama," Valencia said, "I've been thinking about going back to school." "School?" "Community college. Maybe get a degree in business, or accounting, or something practical." She looked embarrassed. "I have a bachelor's degree in art history, which is beautiful but useless when you're trying to help your husband rebuild his career and can't rely on family money." "That's a wonderful idea. I was hoping." She hesitated. "I was hoping maybe we could go together. I saw that there's a program for adults who never finished high school. You could get your GED, and then if you wanted, you could take college classes too." I stared at her, not sure I'd heard correctly. "You want to go to school together?" "I want to stop being ashamed of where I came from. And I want to understand what you never had the chance to learn. Maybe if I'd understood how hard it was for you, how much education means when you don't have it, I wouldn't have." She trailed off, but I knew what she meant. ## 6 months later, reconciliation and redemption. On a Saturday morning in March, Valencia showed up at my apartment with a box of pastries from the bakery where I used to buy day-old bread when money was tight. "I remember you always said these were the best in the city," she said. "But we could never afford the fresh ones." We sat at my small kitchen table, the same table where she'd done her homework as a child, where I'd worried about making rent, where I'd decided to fight for justice. "Mama, I've been thinking about going back to school. Community college. Maybe get a degree in business or accounting." She looked embarrassed. "I was hoping maybe we could go together. There's a program for adults who never finished high school. You could get your GED, then take college classes if you wanted." I stared at her. "You want to go to school together?" "I want to stop being ashamed of where I came from. And I want to understand what you never had the chance to learn." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I can't undo what I said at my wedding. Those words are out there forever. But I can show you, every day, that I don't believe them. That you're the smartest, strongest woman I've ever known, with or without a diploma. You don't need to prove anything to me, Valencia." "Yes, I do. I need to prove it to myself." We enrolled the following week. We studied together just like old times, except now I was learning algebra while she reviewed financial statements. It wasn't always easy, but we kept going. Together. ### 1 year later, graduation. 1 year after Valencia's wedding, I walked across a stage to receive my high school diploma. At 71 years old, after 53 years without one, I finally had that piece of paper. Valencia cheered louder than anyone. Miguel and Carmen were there with their children. Even Preston came, presenting me with flowers and a bow that made me laugh. That night, we had a celebration dinner at my apartment. Not catered by expensive professionals, but cooked by all of us together, Valencia making her father's favorite rice dish, Miguel grilling chicken, Carmen preparing salad, Preston setting the table with paper plates. It wasn't fancy or elegant. But it was real. And it was ours. "I love you, Mama," Valencia said. "Thank you for not giving up on me. I love you too, mi amor. Always." I'd won something far more valuable than any lawsuit settlement. I'd won back my daughter. I'd won the truth. And I'd won the right to be myself, unapologetically, authentically, completely. ### 2 years later, full circle. 2 years after the wedding that changed everything, Valencia gave birth to a daughter. She named her Miriam, after me. When I held my granddaughter for the first time, Valencia said, "I want her to know where she comes from." The real story, about a grandmother who worked in a factory and raised 3 children alone and kept fighting. About a family that survived poverty and betrayal and came out stronger. "Even the parts that make you look bad?" I asked. "Especially those parts." Because I want her to know that people make mistakes, that we hurt the people we love sometimes. But if we're brave enough to face what we've done, if we're willing to fight for what's right even when it costs everything, then we get second chances. She paused. You gave me a second chance, Mama. When I didn't deserve it. You still found a way to let me come home. My granddaughter is 5 now, and she knows that her grandma Miriam got her high school diploma at 71. She knows I worked in a factory and never had much money. And she thinks it's the coolest thing in the world. You're like a superhero, Grandma, she told me last week. You fought bad guys and won. I laughed. Something like that, mi amor. Something like that. #### where we are now. I'm 73 now, still living in my small apartment in Riverside. Valencia and I have dinner together every Sunday. Preston has become like a son to me. Miguel tells me often that he's proud of me. The settlement money? Most of it is doing good in the world, scholarships for students who need them, small business loans for people starting over, donations to organizations that help families in poverty. Bradford served 2 years in federal prison for fraud. Genevieve remarried another wealthy man, learning nothing from the experience. And me? I'm just Miriam. The factory worker who got her GED at 71. The mother who loved her daughter enough to let her go and enough to welcome her back. The widow who kept a secret for 25 years and then had the courage to tell the truth. I'm not rich or educated or sophisticated. But I'm not stupid either. And I'm not ashamed of who I am anymore. Sometimes the people the world dismisses as stupid, as uneducated, as unimportant, we're stronger than anyone knows. We survive things that would break others. And when we finally decide to fight back, we fight with a power born from decades of being underestimated. To everyone who's ever been called stupid, who's ever been made to feel less than because of their education or income or background, you're not alone. Your worth isn't determined by degrees on a wall or zeros in a bank account. You're valuable exactly as you are. And to anyone who's been humiliated by someone they love, who's been told they're an embarrassment, you don't have to stay silent. You can fight back. You can tell your truth. You can demand the respect you deserve. Don't let anyone take that from you. Not even your own children. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where someone you loved made you feel ashamed of who you are? What would you have done in my situation? Comment below and share this story. You never know who might need to hear it, who might need to know that it's never too late to fight for yourself, to tell your truth, to reclaim your dignity. Remember, you are not stupid. You are not worthless. You are not an embarrassment. You are enough. Exactly as you are. The end.